Hello, this video is to walk you through the emotional disturbance eligibility form. As a reminder, you can follow along with the exemplar and guidance form that I will be using by going into the special education classroom, school psychologist's corner, and ED exemplar and guidance. When you complete the emotional disturbance evaluation form, this is a fairly straightforward form compared to some other Department of Education forms. A lot of it is just check boxes that are yes and no, although there are some very specific criteria that the department wants you to follow when answering those questions, yes or no. The first two questions in particular are questions to which we might initially feel like we want to say yes to, but when we really look at the department's definitions, we're almost always going to say no. And the reason for that is, both of these boxes ask if the student exhibits an inability to do something. In the first box, it's an inability to learn, and in the second box, it's an inability to build or maintain satisfactory relationships. And the department goes on to indicate that when they say inability, they literally mean inability. Not difficulty, not challenge, not they have to work 10 times as hard as everyone else, but they literally cannot learn or they cannot form satisfactory relationships with anybody. So that satisfactory relationships question refers to relationships with peers, with teachers, really with almost anybody within the school building. So to indicate yes to either one of these would mean the student has made zero academic progress during their entire enrollment in school, for number one, or the student has no relationships with any person within the school building, for number two. So almost always those are going to be no. 3 through 5 are where we start. It becomes more likely that we're going to say yes to these questions. These are a student who exhibits inappropriate types of behaviors or feelings under normal circumstances, which they go on to define as behaviors that are out of the ordinary. Number 4 is a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. So they do go on to indicate here that this is seen in most aspects of the student's life. So not just at school. If we're going to say yes to number 4, we want to have some evidence that the unhappiness with which the student presents is also something that happens for them outside of our walls. And then for number 5, the question is about a tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears related to personal or school problems. And these need to be pretty excessive. They need to be really markedly different than their same age peers. In order for us to determine that a student has an emotional disability, we have to say yes to at least one of these 5 questions. Sometimes it is only one. There aren't a lot of questions here. And for a student who demonstrates, for example, a major depressive condition, we might only be saying yes to number 4. But it's a pretty significant yes. And so we have a verification box here where we're going to indicate what evidence do we have to support our yes answers above? Or if we're saying no to all of these and determining that the student does not have an emotional disability, we're also going to verify that down here. And the way that we do that is by using things like ODR or Swiss data if we have evidence of number 3, or to some extent number 5. We might even use PowerSchool data for number 5 if there's an attendance issue. We can use results of a functional behavior assessment, and we also very commonly use rating scale scores. This can be differentiated a little bit from the adverse effect form, which you will also use if you are determining an emotional disability. The difference on the adverse effect form is that you have to be very careful about which box you put your rating scale scores into. But for the emotional disturbance form, almost any rating scale score is going to go only in this box. The ED form only has 2 verification boxes. This first box is to verify symptoms, and all symptoms that are captured by rating scales will go here. The second box is primarily verification of diagnosis. So that's separate information. We're not going to be putting rating scale scores in that box. So dump any and all rating scale scores that are relevant here. That can be things related to externalizing behaviors, problem behavior, discipline related things, as well as social emotional concerns. They all can go into this box. You see, I've put a whole spiel in here that I've already talked about relative to the inability piece of this form. So if you happen to forget this or be going through this form without rewatching the video, that information is still there for you. Once you've provided your verification in that box, you're going to move along to Part B, assuming you've said yes. If the student doesn't qualify, you don't have to do this part. You can jump right over this part. But if you've said yes and you're proceeding with identification, you need to answer questions 6 and 7, which are relative to chronicity, severity, and pervasiveness. So question 6 just wants to know, have the symptoms or behaviors that you identified in the previous section been observed either for about 6 months already, or are they likely to continue for at least 6 months? One or the other. Oftentimes it's both, but we need to have at least one or the other. And then it's sort of asking again, have these symptoms been present to a marked degree? Are they apparent in school? So it can't just be student is having a lot of emotional or behavioral things going on at home. It has to be apparent in school, and it has to be beyond the range of what we would expect from another student of their age or grade. Once again, if you say no to both of these, the student doesn't qualify. If you've said yes, then you proceed to the next section. And that's the adverse impact section. The bulk of this information is actually reflected on the adverse effect form, but it's really just a quick yes or no. Does the student demonstrate a sufficient adverse effect to need to proceed with an IEP? Do they actually need some kind of service to benefit from their education, or no? If you say no, proceed to the end, you're all done. If you say yes, proceed to Part D, which is looking at rule outs. So are there other factors that might explain what's going on for the student beyond the emotional stuff that we've already documented? The primary question that they want to know is, does the student exhibit what they call social maladjustment as the primary explanation for the educational difficulties? So if you read through the definition of social maladjustment, you'll see that a lot of our students who we identify under emotional disability do demonstrate some of those things. However, if they also have some kind of a significant emotional issue that might be contributing to that, or even just exist alongside that, then they still can qualify. It just can't be that social maladjustment is the only issue. So we would, and this is where I referenced above that we have a second section here where we have to provide some verification, and this is that box. It hides a little bit in Adori. I want to show you this in Adori quickly. As you're going through, the verification for numbers 1 through 5 is big and you can't really miss it. The verification for number 9 sort of hides over here. It's a little bit smaller and it's within the box. It's not even its own separate thing. So you can miss it if you're not paying attention, but it's really important you click in there and actually provide that verification. So generally what you're going to verify here is a diagnosis. And when you do that, you want to make sure that you indicate who provided it so that the department knows that it's someone who's qualified to do that. When did they do it? And then what is that specific diagnosis? So this is an exemplar statement for you right here. It should look something like that. And then the second part, number 10, is a whole list of other things that might be, and this is an important key term here, the primary explanation for the student's educational difficulties. So if the student happens to have generalized anxiety as well as, let's say, an intellectual disability, and the team has determined that both are equally impactful for the student, or that the anxiety is more impactful for the student, then you're going to say no. If, however, the team indicated that, well, sure, the student has an intellectual disability and anxiety, but the anxiety is manageable, it's the intellectual disability that's really interfering with education, then you would say yes here. The intellectual disability is the primary explanation for the student's educational difficulties, so they do not qualify under emotional disturbance. Once again, you need to have, well, on this one it's a little bit backwards. On this one, you need to have said no to both 9 and 10 to continue with the form, to continue with indicating eligibility. If you have said yes to either of these questions, then the student does not qualify under this particular eligibility category, and you would move on to the conclusions. One last question. If you've made it this far and the student still looks like they're going to qualify, this is where you're asking, because of the problems identified above, does the student require specialized instruction? So this is sort of the, do they need an IEP, or would a 504 or something less restrictive be more appropriate? Yes means IEP, no means no IEP. And then your conclusion, if you've made it this far, if you say yes to number 11, then your conclusion is yes. The student exhibits the above characteristics of an emotional disturbance. If at any point above, in any of those spots where I said, if you answered in this way, you're all done, then you would say no here. And then you have to say this, I don't know why they asked this twice, but do they exhibit the characteristics? Yes, they are eligible. Do they exhibit the characteristics? No, they are not eligible. So a yes is and a no is not. Following that, you do need to obtain signatures on this form, name and title. This is one of those forms that if someone indicates that they do not agree with the decision of the team, they have to provide a written statement as to why they do not agree. So that's the emotional disturbance form. If you have questions, concerns, if you have a particular tricky one that you need to work through, you can always contact your BBC or a member of the psych team to help you work through the form.